stomach pain, that's all? Aren't you overreacting a bit? But it could be appendicitis. As I endured the severe pain and managed to convey this, John snorted through his nose, laughing and dismissing my words, saying it couldn't be true. I'm about to go on a trip with my sister, go to the hospital yourself. In my fading consciousness, I desperately tried to call out to my husband as he left. Wait! But he closed the front door without listening to my pleading voice or Helen's crying. As I curled up in pain, Helen ran to me, crying. Mom, are you gonna die? Don't die. I hugged her small sobbing body, trying to reassure her. I don't remember much after that, but I woke up in the hospital, had some paperwork done, and managed to undergo surgery, staying until the next day. The diagnosis was indeed appendicitis. 3 days later, I was discharged and slowly returning to my usual life. While having dinner with Helen, I received a call from John. He started the conversation with, "Help me!" Turns out, he had an accident on the trip, and the car was no longer usable, needing a pickup. Who is this? I decided to pretend to be a stranger and hung up. The next afternoon, John and Samantha returned home. They burst through the front door, stomping loudly. "And why didn't you come to pick us up? We had to catch a taxi, and it cost extra for both taxi and train fares." Their angry shouts and footsteps were loud until they reached the living room, where they were greeted by an unexpected scene. "Welcome back. You must have had a tough time," I said coldly, glaring at them. In the room, besides Helen and me, were Robert, my parents, and my in-laws, all 14 eyes glaring at John and Samantha in anger. My name isn't Taylor. I live with my husband John and our daughter Helen. I met John on a dating app when I was still working in accounting at a trading company. After dating for about 2.5 years, he proposed to me. "I will make you happy, Anne." John was tall, sociable, cheerful, and popular at work. As for me, I'm introverted, soft-spoken, and can't say no to requests. It seemed like John was too good for someone like me. Yet, he couldn't seem to maintain a relationship with a woman. When I asked him why, he just shrugged, as puzzled as I was. "Well, maybe it's just a matter of compatibility," he would say with a light laugh, but after our marriage, I discovered that he was incredibly attached to his older sister, Samantha, a classic case of a brother complex. John had been taken care of by Samantha since they were kids, as their parents both worked. He had a habit of prioritizing her requests and words above everything else. This was occasional during our dating period, but I had hoped it would change after we got married and he settled into our family. However, my expectation was wrong. Samantha's involvement didn't cease even after our marriage. One weekend, while we were at a cafe, John's phone rang. "Hey, your phone's ringing." "Oh, it's my sister." When I told him, he happily answered Samantha's call. After a few nods, he abruptly stood up. "Sorry, I gotta go help my sister with some shopping, you go on ahead." But today was our day off, we were going to see a movie. We can always watch it some other time. With that, he rushed off in the opposite direction of the movie theater. Even when I told John that as newlyweds, we should value our time together more, he merely dismissed it lightly. I had also spoken to my in-laws about their relationship, hoping they would be considerate, but it had no effect. Samantha, unmarried and living with parents, often turned to John for company, as her friends were married and less available. Whether it was John's inability to detach from his sister or vice versa, or both, I decided to refrain from intervening for a while. After our daughter, Helen, was born the following year, I became busy with household chores and childcare. John took paternity leave and helped with Helen and the housework, but still prioritized Samantha's requests. Samantha's insensitivity was evident even after Helen's birth. She would visit unannounced, staying until John returned, disturbing Helen's naps, and asking for food, which she'd eat and then chat with John until dinner. And, "Thank you for the meal." I always feel bad," she'd say, patting her stomach contentedly. But I couldn't understand why I had to satisfy Samantha's hunger at our family's expense. It would have been slightly more tolerable if she helped with the dishes, but she only demanded desserts after eating. Such surprise visits continued even as Helen grew. I've asked her to call in advance or give some notice a few days before visiting, as it's inconvenient when she comes unannounced. However, she has never once given prior notice. "Samantha, I've told you many times, we need some notice for grocery shopping." "Oh, did I? Sorry, forgot." She'd laugh off, unapologetically, just like John. And there were other incidents like these. When Helen was about to turn 3, we planned a family trip to go apple picking. On the eve of our trip, I received a call from Samantha. She had gotten tickets to a comedy show for the next day and invited us to join. John, far from declining, was excited to go. "What about apple picking?" "We've been planning this for a month." "Yeah, but it's sad for my sister to go to the show alone, isn't it? It'd be a waste to let the ticket go unused. But Helen has been looking forward to going with you. Please come with us." "Well, then we'll just have to change the date." I couldn't understand why it had to be this way and felt overwhelmed. "I know Samantha is important to you, but can't you prioritize Helen and me, your family?" John became indignant. "What are you talking about? It's only natural to care for my only sibling. You're second, Helen is third." In the end, we didn't go apple picking. Instead, Helen and I saw John off to the comedy show and just took a walk in the nearby park. Watching Helen happily play among the autumn leaves, I felt a pang of sadness. On a day when the sky seemed higher and the mornings and evenings grew colder. That day was John's day off, and the three of us, including Helen, were spending family time together. As usual, after finishing my chores, I felt a sharp pain in my right side. I had felt a bit off since the morning but thought it would pass. I had a terrible suspicion that it might be appendicitis. As the thought crossed my mind, the pain worsened rapidly, becoming so intense that I couldn't stand up and ended up doubling over in agony right where I was. "John, help me!" When I called for my husband, he appeared, already dressed up as if he was about to go somewhere. Following behind, Helen toddled over with her small steps. "Mommy? What's wrong?" John asked me in a half-hearted tone, as if just asking to be polite. "My stomach hurts. I can't move. Can you take me to the hospital?" I managed to answer through the severe pain. Hearing my plea, Helen started crying, calling out, "Mommy, Mommy. You're making too much of a stomach ache." "But it might be appendicitis." He snorted through his nose, dismissing my concern. "I've got a trip planned with my sister, you can go to the hospital yourself." He turned and went back to his room, then came out with a small suitcase and briskly headed for the front door. In my dazed state, I desperately tried to stop him. "Wait. My stomach really hurts." Ignoring my pleading voice and Helen's cries, John closed the front door and left. As I curled up in pain, Helen came running to me, crying, "Mommy, are you going to die? Please don't die." I tried to reassure her by hugging her small sobbing body, but I could barely muster any strength. Who else could I rely on? Then I remembered my brother. He is Robert Smith. We hadn't been in touch much since I got married, but he should still be living near my house. He might be out, but I had no one else to turn to. I had Helen fetch my smartphone, and with trembling fingers, I called Robert. The phone rang, and the seemingly endless call tone echoed through the speaker. I waited, praying for a response. Suddenly, the ringing stopped, and I heard a voice say, "Hello? Anne? It's been a while, what's up?" His casual voice was a relief. "Brother, my stomach hurts. I can't move. Please take me to the hospital." "What? Are you okay? I'm coming right now." Robert sensed the urgency in my voice and responded tensely. Robert didn't hang up the phone, instead reassuring me with words like, "Don't worry, and is Helen there? Is she okay?" During this time, I could hear the sounds of him locking his house and starting his car engine, clearly hurrying to come over. Robert has always been the caring type since I was little. Whether I got lost or failed my first choice in high school admissions, he always encouraged me, saying, "Don't worry, it'll be okay." He's my reliable and proud brother. Now, he was chatting with Helen, keeping her from getting anxious, which made me feel much stronger. Soon, I heard the sound of a car pulling up outside, and Robert's voice came through the phone, "I'm here." Coming in. Helen, with unsteady steps, went to the front door to greet him and told him where I was. Robert, dressed in a t-shirt and chinos, looking quite casual, rushed in. This was his usual outfit when he's off work and just popping out to the convenience store for lunch. "Hang in there, Anne. It's okay now, your brother's here. Come on, Helen, let's go, you're worried about Mom, right?" He carried me to his car parked outside, seated both me and Helen in it, and drove us quickly to the hospital. I don't remember much after that, but when I came to, I was in the hospital, having completed some paperwork and somehow finished the surgery. The diagnosis was indeed appendicitis, and I had to stay until the next day. With John gone on his trip, I had no choice but to call my parents for help with Helen's care and explain the situation. They were furious on the other end of the phone but only said, "We'll take care of Helen, just focus on your treatment," before hanging up. When I briefly explained to Robert, he was equally furious. "Wait, John left you two to go on a trip?" "Why?" "He went because Samantha asked him to. Please, take Helen to Mom and Dad's place." Helen, exhausted from crying, was already fast asleep in the chair next to me. "Sure, I'll take care of Helen. You just get some rest." Luckily, Robert would take Helen to our parents' house. As for her clothes and other necessities, we always kept an overnight bag ready at their place, just in case, so there was nothing to worry about. After Robert and Helen left the hospital room, I finally had a moment to breathe. 3 days passed, and I was discharged from the hospital, gradually getting back to my normal life. My recovery was going well, and today, I could comfortably enjoy a meal with Helen. We were having omelets for dinner. Helen was still struggling to use the spoon properly, but was eating without complaint. Then, my smartphone rang. I checked the screen, curious to see who it was, and saw it was John. For a moment, I considered ignoring the call due to its persistent ringing, but I eventually decided to answer it. "Help me!" John cried out as soon as I answered, explaining through tears that he had an accident on his trip. The car was no longer usable, and he needed a pickup. "My car's busted, and I'm stuck here with Samantha. And you can drive, right? Come pick us up." Listening to their childish wailing over the phone, I sighed and responded, Who is this? What are you talking about?" "It's me, don't you recognize my voice?" John's angry response, reminiscent of some scam call, seemed almost comical to me. "Sorry, I can't hear you clearly. I'm going to hang up now." I decided to pretend to be a stranger and, ignoring their cries of "wait a minute," I ended the call. "Who was that?" "Oh, just a wrong number." I quietly set my smartphone to block John's calls and continued dinner with Helen. The next day, in the afternoon, John and Samantha returned home. They burst through the front door, stomping loudly. "And why didn't you come to pick us up? We had to catch a taxi, and it cost extra for both the taxi and train fares." Their angry shouts and footsteps were loud until they reached the living room, where they were greeted by an unexpected scene. "Welcome back. You must have had a tough time," I said coldly, glaring at them. Besides Helen and me, there were Robert, my parents, and John's parents, all 14 eyes glaring angrily at John and Samantha. "Why is everyone here?" John stood there, dumbfounded by the situation, so I explained it to him. You do realize what you've done, right? You left me and Helen to go on a trip. After that, I had to be hospitalized. I've told everything to both my parents and yours, I said in one breath, blaming John. John looked baffled, almost as if he wanted to say, so what's the big deal? But in the end, you were okay, right? You have no idea how worried and helpless Helen and I felt. Samantha, you could have been more considerate. You're always dragging John around for your errands. What? Why am I being scolded? I didn't know about your situation. Both John and Samantha remained adamant that they weren't at fault, instead starting to complain about why I hadn't come to pick them up the day before. I was so angry with both of them that I wanted to slap them right there, but I restrained myself, clenching my fists instead. I couldn't forgive John for choosing to go on a trip with his real sister over his suffering wife and anxious, crying daughter. That's why I had called both our parents and in-laws here for a discussion, but instead of talking it out, John and Samantha faced a barrage of criticism from both families. Helen, scared by the commotion, started crying and clung to my mother. Despite this, my father angrily said, "We trusted you with our daughter, what were you thinking?" And John's mother exclaimed, "You two have gone too far." The pair, usually so assertive, finally looked taken aback, realizing they were completely surrounded by disapproval. John's father sternly ordered, "Kneel down and apologize to and both of you," leading to John and Samantha reluctantly kneeling down. "We're sorry, we won't do it again. I apologize." Receiving such an insincere apology at this point only intensified my anger, leaving me standing there seething with frustration. I was foolish to have expected even a bit of sincerity from them. Controlling my irritation, I presented them with divorce papers. "We're getting a divorce. I've thought it over these last 3 days, and I can't be with you anymore." John's eyes widened. "Divorce is an overreaction," he protested. "You won't be able to live on your own at your age. I don't need a father who doesn't prioritize his family. I'll protect and raise Helen no matter what, so don't worry." I spoke coldly, and John seemed at a loss. John was understandably taken aback, as I had never before rebutted or stood up so strongly against him. This was a side of me he had never seen before. Despite this, he continued to resist and started making various excuses. "If we get divorced, how will people at work see me? Are you trying to ruin my reputation?" "I don't care what happens to your reputation. We're getting divorced." "And what about this house? I'm the one who took out the mortgage. Are you okay with losing your home?" "I've already thought about all that during these 3 days. I've discussed it with my parents, and Helen and I will return to my parents' house." "Wait, what about Helen? Have you asked her what she wants?" John's face lit up as if he had come up with a brilliant idea, but his desperate attempt to bring our daughter into the argument only served to irritate me further. "Why don't you ask her yourself?" John, now visibly shaken, turned to Helen for support. "Helen, you don't want to live without Daddy, do you?" Helen, who had been with my mother until then, shook her head and said through tears when John addressed her, "Daddy's not fun to be with. He never plays with me, always goes out with Auntie. I don't need him. I just need Mommy." Hearing Helen say she didn't need him was undoubtedly a shock to John. John's parents, overhearing this, were even more outraged. "How can a father let his young child feel this way? What kind of person are you?" they exclaimed. John's mother snatched the divorce papers from my hand and slammed them down in front of him, sternly demanding that he agree to the divorce. His face turned red, as if sprouting horns in anger, and he visibly trembled. John signed the divorce papers and then broke down in tears, but no one offered him any sympathy. I wondered if he would have paid more attention to his family had he known it would come to this. But I doubted it. Even if he had known, his actions probably wouldn't have changed. Later, I filed the divorce papers at the city hall, and it was successfully processed. I was free. My in-laws apologized again and agreed to pay more than the usual amount in child support. John ended up selling the house and moving back with his parents, commuting to work from there. John, having his commuting route changed, was teased by his colleagues. He inadvertently mentioned that he was commuting from his parents' home because of his divorce. This quickly became the talk of his department, and for a while, he faced a mix of sympathetic and pitying looks from his coworkers. My cousin, who lived near my in-laws and was known as the speaker in our family. She is known to spread news quickly, therefore, it didn't take long for the entire neighborhood to know about our divorce and the reasons behind it. Within days, everyone in the neighborhood knew about it, proving that her knack for communication was not to be underestimated. As a result, John and Samantha faced scornful glances even for simple trips to the convenience store. As a result of this widespread gossip, the relationship between John and his sister became strained. "Why are you blaming me? If you hadn't gotten divorced, none of this would have happened. It's your fault. If you hadn't interfered with my family, this wouldn't have happened. Show some restraint. You always said you cared more about me than your family every time I asked you out." It seems that my cousin overheard these kinds of exchanges between John and his sister. Helen and I left the house we had lived in and moved back with my parents. My mother took care of me, looking after Helen while I was busy running errands and handling various procedures for a few days. My father, too, was very fond of her, often taking her out in his car to the library to borrow books or to train crossings to watch the trains, making her days enjoyable and fulfilling. Robert also moved closer to our parents' house. When I asked Robert what brought about the sudden move, he explained that his office had relocated, changing his nearest train station, so he moved closer to our family home. It's a coincidence, but I rented an apartment near our parents' house. Helen can come over to play anytime. I've got snacks and juice ready. Candy! Helen's eyes sparkled at the mention of sweets, and she joyfully bounced around, humming apple pie for me. I'm glad you're excited, Robert, but don't give her too much sugar, okay? He laughed and replied, I know. With the support of my family, I was able to start job hunting. Despite the gap in my resume due to childbirth and childcare, I found a job at a small office that seemed willing to hire someone for accounting work. The company, under the president's direction, aimed to create a workplace supportive of parenting. Most employees were mothers, and there was a manual to accommodate sudden early departures or pickups of children in the evening. My parents were impressed and happy with this arrangement. Helen started attending kindergarten and began learning various games and words. This is a maple leaf, and this yellow one is a ginkgo. They're beautiful, aren't they? I said, showing her the red and yellow paper leaves she had made at kindergarten, somewhat clumsily shaped but recognizable. It became clear that she liked beautiful leaves and was becoming skillful with her hands, using scissors more frequently. I remembered how we missed going leaf peeping once and decided to find a nearby spot for it. I discussed it with my parents and Helen, and we planned to go during the next long weekend. I also invited Robert, and he agreed to come. I'll bring lots of snacks. Remember, Helen's snack budget is $10. I reminded him, causing everyone, including my parents and Helen, to burst into laughter. It seemed like Robert didn't quite understand a parent's wish for their child to eat properly, not just snacks, even in the season of hearty appetites. Nevertheless, his affection for Helen was heartwarming. Helen and I continued to live happily with support from our loving family.